Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here. And today I've got a little bit of a grab bag. It is a couple Sony titles and a couple Warner Archive titles. Not all really connected, but all interesting on some level or another. But I'll start with my favorite of them, and that is The Fog of War. This is Errol Morris's film, and he made this film in 2003. I think it's an interview with then 85-year-old Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, for over 7 years, from 61 to 68, during the presidencies of JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson, and so it was very much during the Vietnam War. Now, I think this is interesting only because it's a single conversation with one guy, and I don't think had really done exactly that kind of documentary to that point. And I got to say, I'm a huge Errol Morris fan. I mean, he's part of the reason I love documentary as much as I do is seeing things like The Thin Blue Line and even Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, which came out a little bit before this one. The style and the way that he goes about making his documentaries, often incorporating recreations, as he does in Thin Blue Line. I mean, he also incorporates archival footage and lots of things in really interesting ways. My point being is that, so he's got a new film out right now called The Pigeon Tunnel, and it's made for Apple TV Plus. You can watch it on Apple TV Plus. I just watched it recently. It is a similar sort of life-spanning interview with another important, interesting figure. In this case, it's David Cornwell, a.k.a. John le Carré, the spy novelist. And I think it's interesting to watch The Fog of War and then watch Pigeon Tunnel. I saw them really close together, and I thought that was an enjoyable experience. But it's kind of like him doing Fog of War again with a different guy. But this whole Fog of War is really fascinating. I mean, McNamara, there's a lot of, I don't know about controversy, but certainly some controversy about the fact that he is unapologetic about his involvement in the Vietnam War. He doesn't seem to have too many regrets about his choices and the things he did as part of that conflict. And so I think he definitely takes some heat for some hypocrisy for this documentary. I do find it interesting, too, that he had originally agreed to talk to Errol Morris for about an hour for a TV special, and then he eventually spent like 20 hours peering into Morris's Interrotron. For folks that don't know what the Interrotron is, it's a video device that allows Morris and his subjects to look into each other's eyes while looking directly into the camera lens. So basically you have the camera, and with this somehow Errol Morris's face is projected onto the camera lens like a teleprompter or something, and so the subject sees Errol Morris's face when he's talking into the camera. So you get a very intimate sort of portrait when you use this device, and it's a really neat and pretty awesome documentary style thing that he does. But so anyway, he uses tons of clips from the archival stuff. He has all kinds of audio from these like press conferences and then like phone calls. I don't even know how this stuff is captured or why, but there's also like TV interviews and TV reports and old photos and magazine covers. I mean, he's a fascinating guy, I gotta say, because he goes through his history. I mean, he works for the Ford Motor Company for a number of years, and that's sort of the jumping off point where Kennedy, he's sort of a wonderkind there. And I won't go into the specifics of that, but he's, part of what gets seatbelts, installed in Ford cars. And anyway, Kennedy asked him to be Secretary of Defense. He asked him to be something else, I think, at first. I can't remember, but then Secretary of Defense, and of course he's Secretary of Defense when Kennedy is assassinated and LBJ takes over. And yeah, just a fascinating story to hear about the Vietnam War from the very beginnings of it, because I feel like sometimes people don't know as well where it starts. And granted, you're getting one guy's perspective on it, but there are some things about what he says that I find fascinating in terms of how we got into that conflict and how it escalated and the choices that he suggested and the choices that LBJ made and how they were at odds sometimes and things like that. But definitely an interesting guy for sure. And a great, ever tense and emotional score from Philip Glass, who often worked with Errol Morris. This Blu-ray has, well, let me just read the back, actually. Former Secretary of Defense under President Kennedy and Johnson, Robert S. McNamara was one of the most controversial and influential political figures of the 20th century. Now, for the first time ever, he sits down one-on-one with award-winning director Errol Morris to offer a candid and intimate journey through some of the most seminal events in contemporary American history. As leader of the world's most powerful military force during the nation's most volatile period in recent years, McNamara offers new and often surprising insights into the bombing of Tokyo, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the effects of the Vietnam War. So it's not just Vietnam. There's more. He prefaces with a lot of stuff, featuring newly released Oval Office recorded conversations with Presidents JFK and LBJ. Fog of War received critical acclaim for its up-close and personal insider perspective. Yeah, I mean, it's really something. It's a very special documentary, one of his better ones. This Blu-ray includes additional scenes, something like 24 extra scenes running about 38 minutes, and a lot of them are like personal asides, so you can kind of see why they were excised from the film itself. But they're, if you're interested in this guy, there's a lot more stuff there to examine. There's also something called Robert McNamara's 10 Lessons, because there is lessons that are used throughout the film as sort of markers, but there's 10 lessons that are just text on screen, and it's things like Lesson 1, the human race will not eliminate war in this century, but we can reduce the brutality of war, the level of killing, by adhering to the principles of, quote, just war, in particular principle of proportionality. Lesson 2, the indefinite combination of human fallibility and nuclear weapons will lead to the destruction of nations. Lesson 3, we are the most powerful nation in the world economically, politically, and militarily, and we are likely to remain so for decades ahead, but we are not omniscient. If we cannot persuade other nations with similar interests and similar values of the merits of our proposed use of that power, we should not proceed unilaterally, except in the unlikely requirement to defend the continental U.S., Alaska, and Hawaii. And it goes on. There's like 6 more of these, or 7 more, or whatever. But they're just text on screen, but they're fascinating little bits, I don't know that Errol Morris does a lot of commentaries, but I would have loved to have heard a commentary from him on this. I know, like, one of the things I feel like I read an interview or something, a couple times, he almost point blank asks McNamara, do you regret your involvement or your choices, and he really dodges that question. In fact, he says something to the effect of, in terms of interviews, he's like, never answer the question asked, answer the question you wish was asked, which I find very intriguing, and he does that a lot in the documentary. Anyway, still really great portrait of an interesting guy and a nice Blu-ray for Errol Morris fans. That's Fog of War. That's from Sony. Next up, we have one of the Warner Archives. This is Rapa Nui from 1994. A very forgotten film, I think in part because it was a big flop. It is a blank check movie, if you will. It is a movie made by director Kevin Reynolds. Kevin Reynolds, most known for things like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and of course another flop, Waterworld, but I love Fandango, his first feature. Really great coming-of-age college road trip movie, just fantastic, and Warner Archive put that on a Blu-ray years ago. One of my favorites, actually. But so Kevin Reynolds is coming off the great success of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which was a huge hit. He and Kevin Costner worked together, obviously, a lot. He's in Fandango, and then he's in Robin Hood, and he's in Waterworld. And so this is a movie I guess Reynolds had wanted to make for like 15 years and had been thinking about, but nobody would give him the money, and he didn't know where to film it. And then they actually scouted Easter Island, and he decided that was the only place he could film it, despite the remote nature of that location. So it's pretty unique in that it's, not a lot of movies have been filmed on Easter Island. But for those that don't know, the story, an island paradise becomes a scarred paradise, lost in the spectacular South Seas adventure Rapa Nui, co-produced by Kevin Costner, Jason Scott Lee, and Esai Morales. Jason Scott Lee and Esai Morales play boyhood friends turned fierce rivals in this tumultuous tale of love and war. Each loves the same woman, Sandra Holt of Black Robe, and each intends to win her in marriage by competing for the island leadership in genuine tribal contest. But the bitterness of the competition spills over into a savage civil war and the isolated island's destiny that hangs in the balance. Lush, romantic, and heroic, Rapa Nui is an amazing achievement of imagination that dazzles the eye and challenges the mind. So this island, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, has, at the time of this story, two sort of factions, two tribes, if you will, the long ears and the short ears. I believe the long ears are the nobility, and the short ears are sort of the commoners, and that is where the Esai Morales and Jason Scott Lee characters come from, and that is part of the reason their competition is what sort of spurs that civil war, thing that happens on this island. So it is a story of competition and building statues and raising statues, and also a story of, sort of culture torn apart in a way. A really interesting movie, and like I said, pretty well forgotten at this point. It did not, I saw something on Wiki that was like $20 million budget, $300,000 return at the box office. I don't know if that's the extent of how badly it performed, and I don't know if that's part of a bad marketing campaign or a studio that wasn't behind the film. But it's too bad because it's a better movie than that, and so it's neat to see it get this Blu-ray. One downside is that this only has a trailer as a feature. What I do recommend is going to YouTube and looking up Kevin Reynolds' Rapa Nui, and I think Indie Film Hustle has an interview with him where he actually has a clip where he talks specifically about Rapa Nui and why he was attracted to this story and how long it took him to make. And then I also found Rapa Nui making of, I think it's spelled making off, on YouTube, and it's like a 47-minute TV special maybe that was done, I'm guessing, circa 1994, that does show, behind the scenes. It has interviews with Kevin Reynolds and more. So you can augment your purchase of this Blu-ray with some behind-the-scenes material that I'm guessing was difficult to include, but is easily available. So, like I said, a very fascinating and oft-forgotten film, now getting a nice Blu-ray, 239-1, a nice widescreen Blu-ray from Warner Archive. That is Rapa Nui. And next we have In Love and War. This one is directed by the great Richard Attenborough, who obviously is an actor, was in things like Jurassic Park. I think a lot of people remember him from that, but he was obviously in a ton of other stuff. But also a great director in his own right. He did things like Gandhi, Bridge Too Far, Chaplin, A Chorus Line, Shadowlands, Magic, if you like creepy puppets, and I do. But this is a sort of latter effort from him. And a fascinating story, because it is about a young Ernest Hemingway, played by Chris O'Donnell, and a young nurse sent to the front in World War I. I'm curious how they define it in the back. Let's see here. Caught in the crossfire of a world at war, love was the last thing on their minds, but for a beautiful nurse and a heroic young soldier in search of adventure, romance blossomed and changed their lives forever. Sandra Bullock and Chris O'Donnell star in the Academy Award winner Richard Attenborough's epic love story about Ernest Hemingway and the romance which inspired him to write his masterpiece, A Farewell to Arms. So that's cool. That's this story leads to that. A story of desperate love and imminent danger chronicles the relationship between 18-year-old Hemingway and Agnes von Kurowski, the medical aide who nursed him back to health after a devastating battlefield injury. So, yeah, I hadn't seen this. I remember it coming out and kind of being over both Sandra Bullock and Chris O'Donnell in 1996, but I was in film school at the time. I was perhaps a little snobby and never checked this out, but it is an interesting film. Also stars Mackenzie Aston, among others, but it's an enjoyable performance from both. Chris O'Donnell definitely gives a lot of, chutzpah to this character. This guy shows up, Ernie Hemingway shows up, so it says he's like a reporter from Kansas City, and immediately he's part of a group like the U.S. is sending over medical support and sort of just general morale support for the Italian front, and so he immediately shows up and asks for a change of assignment, and his commanding officer's like, I didn't even know you were reporting yet, and the answer is no. But then he's able to talk him into letting him go to the front and meet with the Italian soldiers, which he does. He brings some cigarettes, to sort of cheer them up, etc. He has a bad eye, I guess, so he can't. That was why he wasn't allowed to be an actual soldier. But in his meeting with the Italians, he ends up getting hit with this barrage of artillery or whatever, and he gets shot in the leg, and he's brought back to the hospital where Sandra Bullock's character is caring for him. His leg wound is pretty bad, and it could be gangrene, but she apparently is aware of some irrigation techniques that allow her to maybe help save his leg, which she does, but it is a case of like he almost loses his leg, but then he has to recover from the wound, and she helps him with that, and it kind of goes from there. But yeah, it's really interesting. It says their affair slowly blossoms until Hemingway boldly asks Agnes to be his wife and journey to America with him. Richard Attenborough directs this drama based on the real-life experiences of the famed novelist. So again, hasn't been logged a lot on Letterboxd, so I think it's another movie that I feel like people haven't seen. So if you're into 90s movies, you're into 90s actors, Sandra Bullock and Chris O'Donnell are pretty darn 90s. Definitely worth a look in that case. But yeah, a nice new Blu-ray, another widescreen 2:3:9:1 transfer from Warner Archive. Looks very nice. Both this and Rapa Nui look nice. This one also just has a theatrical trailer that's included with it. All right. We'll go out on a goofy note. Last film, this is also from Sony. This is Guarding Tess. This one is from director Hugh Wilson, who I'm a big fan of Hugh Wilson. If that name doesn't ring a bell, maybe some movies like Police Academy might catch your attention. He is the guy behind Police Academy. He did Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser and Alicia Silverstone, which I'm a big fan of that movie. I think that movie is an absolute delight. But he also did a movie I love called Rustler's Rhapsody with Tom Berenger. This is right after Police Academy, kind of his blank check movie, and it's a weird parody western, but it's funny and really enjoyable. Not on Blu-ray to my knowledge at this point, but anyway, he also did like First Wives Club, Dudley Do-Right, Burglar, etc. So he does Guarding Tess in between, let's see here, before Dudley Do-Right, I guess after Burglar, and before Blast from the Past. God, did he do two movies in 99? First Wives Club is 96. Anyway, this is interesting, I think, because it stars, of course, Nicolas Cage, and this is when, Nicolas Cage enjoying a really wonderful renaissance of some fantastic films, Pig, Mandy, all kinds of good stuff coming from him lately. Dream Scenario has just come out. Very solid film there, too. This is back when he was doing some oddball comedies for studios. Now he's a little bit more independent. But this is, let's see here. What do you do with a former first lady who's unpredictable, ornery, and impossible to please? Anything she wants. Shirley MacLaine and Nicolas Cage star in this compassionate look at the life after the White House for two former Washington insiders, the First Lady Tess Carlisle and Secret Service agent Doug Chesnick. And uproarious as it is uplifting, guarding Tess is a grand mixture of laughter and tears. So I remember this came out in 94 when I was working at a video store. I remember it was in decent demand. Like, people wanted to see this movie, maybe because they wanted to see Shirley MacLaine and Nicolas Cage at odds with each other. Basically, the movie opens with him, in some house. We don't know whose house it is at the time. He's bringing breakfast to someone. We don't see that person. And he's basically like, all right, I'm out. And he's done. He's done what we find out. He's finished a 3-year stint guarding this ex-first lady, Tess, played by Shirley MacLaine. He goes back to Washington, and he goes to see a superior officer, and immediately the guy's like, well, he's talking to him about, like, how did you deal with her? And he's like, well, it's difficult, but, you have to kind of figure her out, and I was able to do that. And anyway, moving on, I'd love a new assignment, something in the White House or somewhere. And the guy's like, well, actually, Tess called the president, and you find out later she has a connection to the president that is like he was her then husband, president's vice president or something. And so he feels like, and she backed him. And so the president at this time, who we never see, I don't think, maybe we do, never really wants to do whatever Tess wants. And basically Tess likes Nicolas Cage's character. Doug wants him back for another 3 years. He can say no, but he'd be basically saying no to the president, which would be bad. So he decides to do it again. And he comes back, and we get to see just how ornery Tess is and how he deals with her. And it's fun and touching and silly, and has a really interesting supporting cast, including Austin Pendleton, Edward Albert, James Rebhorn, Richard Griffiths, who I always remember from With Nail and I, as one of the guys in the house, and Hugh Wilson, I guess, shows up in the movie somewhere. He's the voice of the president, I think. That's pretty funny. So anyway, it's a very cute Cage performance. If you're into the edgier stuff he's been doing now, it might be a little different than you're used to, but I think this is around the time when Cage was doing a lot more comedic stuff. And so it really kind of blends in with some of those goofy comedies of that time. I'm thinking of like Amos and Andrew, and so this is 94. So yeah, I'm just trying to think like what he's doing. I mean, he does Face Off in 97. He does The Rock in 96. Trouble in Paradise is the one I was thinking of. That's also 94. It Could Happen to You is 94. Honeymoon in Vegas is 92. So he's doing some interesting stuff, but he's also doing like Red Walk West in 93. And again, Amos and Andrew is 93. So a lot of comedies in this section of his career, but he starts to move on to more serious stuff like Face Off and Con Air and Snake Eyes and 8mm and City of Angels. So he's in a particular slot where he's doing some comedic stuff. And if you're into that period of his career, this is definitely worth your time, worth a look. I'd love a commentary from Hugh Wilson on anything, because I actually like him a lot, so I just love to hear his thoughts. But unfortunately, this is another just bare bones original theatrical trailer only. But still, Nicolas Cage completists will want to check out Guarding Tess as well. But that'll do it for this round. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.